This is Floss Weekly, episode 769, recorded Wednesday, February the 7th. OpenCost. We spent how much? Hey, this week Katherine joins me. We talk with Matt Ray, the community manager at OpenCost. That project is all about tracking where your dollars and cents go for your cloud compute costs. And it turns out it may just keep you out of trouble if part of your infrastructure gets compromised too. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned. Hey, welcome. It is time for Floss Weekly. That's the show about free, Libre, and open source software. I'm your host, Jonathan Bennett. It's not just me. We have Katherine with us today. Hey, Katherine, welcome.
Hey, Jonathan. Thanks.
Yeah, it's good to have you again. For those that don't know, aren't aware, Katherine has quite the pedigree of Linux and open source geekiness, from all the way from the Linux Journal to now is it open source evangelist at Intel? Is that right?
Yes, that is my official job that I do every day.
All right.
And some nights.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So along this open source path, have you ever done anything with the cloud?
Gee, well, yes. Funny you mentioned it. Haven't we all? I mean, is there any cloud even aside? I mean, today there are so many things that have become ubiquitous in the last 10 years. Like, has anybody not had to touch Kubernetes? Right? 10 years ago, it was like, what is that? But or even 5, it wasn't even as widely adopted. But anyway, yes, I have. I have touched some clouds.
The saying that I love the best, and it's a little bit cynical, but I still like it, is the cloud is just a fancy way to talk about someone else's computers.
Yes, and I can't remember which of the open source people said that.
I can't remember who said it
was
first.
Was it Stallman? It might have been Stallman. I don't know.
It may have been. That seems like a sort of cynical Stallman thing to say.
Yeah,
there's a bit of
just
truth.
Other people's computers.
Yeah, there's a bit of truth to it, though. And one of the interesting things about that is when you use other people's computers, they charge you for it. Imagine that. You have to pay money for using the cloud.
Darn
and
it.
I know. Well, but that's what today's guest is all about. It's KubeCost, OpenCost. I think they go by both terms. We'll ask him here in just a second. So we've got Matt Ray with us talking about this project. Is this something that you're familiar with, Katherine?
I am not. I guess, fortunately, I have not been the person in the position to be concerned with keeping costs reasonable. But I get the problem that they're solving. Though I'd like to hear more.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and bring him on. Matt, welcome to the show. And I've got to ask first: was there a multi-million-dollar cloud build that led to all of this?
Definitely, there were people around a lot of cloud builds in the early days. So OpenCost is the name of the project, and it came from a company that my employer called KubeCost. The two founders were on the Borg team on the monitoring side of it, and they were watching the large volumes of compute and running internal metrics at Google. And so they were definitely around some very, very large numbers, and hopefully the chargeback wasn't too bad. But we've definitely seen some very, very large numbers.
Mm-hmm. There's I was looking at this before the show started. There's a company, they're the ones behind Basecamp, 37 Signals, and they came out, I think it was either 2022 or 2023, they came out and said, we spent $3.2 million on the cloud this year. We're going to go back to real servers. And it was kind of I don't know that I would call it a wake-up call, but it was sort of a sea change in the way everybody thought about it. So, you can save money using the cloud. You don't have to pay for your own servers. And, oh, wait, that costs money too.
Yeah. It's always going to be money somewhere, but you could definitely be more efficient with how you spend it.
So let's talk about that. What's kind of the 30,000-foot view of this project? Is it just a project? Is it a commercial offering? What are the pieces that go together here?
Sure. So OpenCost is a Cloud Native Computing Foundation sandbox project. So in June of 2022, KubeCost worked with a bunch of other companies and volunteers and folks to write what they called the OpenCost specification, which was trying to standardize how to compute cost on Kubernetes. So, when you get your cloud bill, usually it says, "Hey, you got a bunch of EC2," and you're like, "Well, how much does that?" And then, if you drill down into the numbers, you can say, "Well, I've got, 40 MX larges at $5 an hour." I'm just making up numbers, but it doesn't tell you how much Kubernetes costs. There might be a management fee for Kubernetes, but it doesn't say like the namespace within Kubernetes cost $1 an hour, and this other one was $3 an hour, and you were wasting $1 an hour. So what the OpenCost specification did was it actually says, well, here's how we calculate how those things are split. How you determine shared CPU, shared memory, shared storage, how all that stuff is sorted out. And so they hammered out a specification for that. And then KubeCost open sourced OpenCost the implementation. And so the OpenCost project is both the specification and the implementation. So it's a monitoring engine that is now a CNCF project. And what you can do with that engine is deploy it within your Kubernetes cluster, and it will pay attention to everything that Kubernetes is doing. So it's recording, pods and namespaces and deployments and, all those primitives. And then it looks at the on-demand pricing from your cloud provider. It says, MX large, Arch 64 costs, $3 an hour. And it checks in periodically and it says, okay, this is what the price was at that time. Mm-hmm. It checks spot instances. It works on Azure, GCP, and others. And then it just records out to Prometheus. And so then later on, you can come and say, well, I want to see how much this namespace cost, from Tuesday to Thursday of last week. And so you can run those queries against Prometheus. And, pretty much any Kubernetes primitive is stored in there. And, we have that pricing at that time available to us. So that's what OpenCost does. It's also got a UI. So we've got a pretty simple 2-page UI for viewing that stuff. You can run it as a Prometheus metric exporter. So, you just run it headless and send those metrics to Grafana or, your other, BI tool or visualization tool of choice. And then recently we added what we call cloud cost support, which is you actually go and read the cost and usage billing reports. So if you're using AWS or Azure or GCP, they have a list price for how much everything costs. But people who spend a lot of money are going to go in and make deals with their cloud providers. You have what they call reserved instances or savings plans, or some of the billing as you hit certain thresholds, it gets cheaper. None of that's actually caught in OpenCost. We're gathering the on-demand prices, but we don't do what they call reconciliation, which is go and fix those numbers based off your savings. But we recently added support for reading those bills and adding an API and reporting over that, so you can go in and dig into them in OpenCost too. So it's a monitoring engine for cloud billing and Kubernetes cost.
Now, is there any support for, let's say, S3 storage? That's part of some people's solutions for all of their cloud stuff. Is this just Kubernetes, or are there other pieces like that plug in?
We are working on adding that. So until like December of last year, it was just Kubernetes, and we were working on adding what we were calling external asset costs. That's still under development, but with the new cloud cost, you could go and see your S3 cost. You just can't attribute them back to Kubernetes, which is actually really useful because there's not a lot of open source out there for reading the cost and usage reports. Yeah. I've seen customers with like gigabytes a day of billing data. because the Amazon ones, it publishes out to an S3 bucket, 24 hours, 48 hours after you consume it, and then it's line item. Hey, here's how much compute. Here's how much of this M3X large you were using, every day, each node, and then how much S3 storage, each bucket, how much network traffic, how much every single line item. It's all in that cost and usage report. That thing is big, and what we recently added is you can read it, and it's maintained, and it has an API, so you can run queries against it, which is actually pretty new. And so, what we've been doing to support that is there are going to be people who that's exciting. I mean, it doesn't sound exciting, maybe, but in the world of open source FinOps, like there hasn't been anything like that. And so we've, we recently added like Docker support, so you don't have to run inside of Kubernetes. You could run just the cloud cost part by itself, and so that's kind of on the front.
Yeah. Now, obviously, we're kind of focused in on Amazon because they're the big player here. Not the only one, but they're the big one.
Yeah.
Did you have to get buy-in from Amazon to be able to make these tools work? Like, did they have to add APIs for you guys to be able to track this the way you are?
No. They have. I mean, probably. I don't recall what year it was that EC2 and S3 launched, but probably within 3 months of them launching, people were like, "I need better billing. I need to see what's inside this black box." And so, they definitely led with how they published their billing. Where they're like, fine, you can have a fire hose, because your choices used to be you get a one-page bill that's like, you owe us, $400,000 a month, and you just have this line item that's like 200,000 of that is EC2, and you're like, what does this mean, right? Or you can eat the fire hose, and so the fire hose is an S3 bucket where they publish everything, and that people have written a lot of scripts and fancy jQueries to read through that stuff, but it's documented, but it's just a lot of content, and maintaining that is hard. And so that's why like I tell people about this cloud cost, because people who know that this is hard, know that part's tricky, and people who know Kubernetes know that tracking Kubernetes is hard, and then tying the billing all together is even it's complicated.
Yeah.
But it's not just AWS. So we definitely support Azure and GCP. Azure they've been very enthusiastic about OpenCost. They have actually taken the OpenCost, the Kubernetes monitoring component, and they've integrated it into their own billing.
Oh, cool.
So now within Azure, it's from my understanding, it's the first Azure service where you can drill down and see your own usage. So it used to be, if you went to the Azure billing dashboard, you could see, oh, I've got some compute, I've got some networks, I've got some storage, but it didn't tell you how it was being used. And now in Azure Kubernetes service, you can actually break it down into namespace. You can see which pods, which deployments, which containers are costing what inside your bill. And so, OpenCost it's got end users. People definitely use it. Just I need these metrics, but it also gets embedded into other solutions. And so Azure uses it, Grafana Cloud uses it, KubeCost uses it.
So, okay, a couple of things. So first, you mentioned Azure has really embraced the project. Are they contributing to it?
Yes. So one of the exciting milestones for us as a cloud native computing foundation is we've just got our first non-KubeCost maintainer, and it's a gentleman from Microsoft. So
fabulous.
If you're familiar with the CNCF, there are different levels of projects: sandbox, incubation, and graduated. You can move into incubation with all the maintainers working for one company, but you'll never ever graduate if everybody works at one company.
Right.
We're definitely excited to have our first non KubeCost maintainer, and we're working on getting more of those. We're trying to move into incubation right now, so that's our current status.
Okay, yeah, worthy goal. So speaking of CNCF, that's actually something that I wanted to talk about a little bit. So. Again, I think that the people who listen to me elsewhere, like my Intel podcast, are probably sick of me harping on the massive scale of the cloud native landscape.
Oh yeah.
But it's massive and overwhelming, and there's so many options at any step of the development process, right? Anyway, so I wonder. So when you come in, so I have several questions actually. First is I'd like to hear about the experience of entering and contributing your project to the organization and becoming becoming a CNCF project, and then and then finding your way as a project and your identity and figuring out how you fit into that landscape and how to promote yourself and how to attract contributors and all of that stuff. How do you approach all of that?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack there. When the project wants to enter the sandbox, you write up, hey, we have this open source. We have this project that we would like that is open source, or we're going to be open sourcing. Here's what we're going to do with it. Here's how we think it fits into your landscape. The CNCF has a board, the Technical Oversight Committee, the TOC, and they review sandbox applications. And they will look at it and say, like, nobody cares, or this looks compelling. How do you see yourself progressing? Why should we accept this? What are you going to do with it? How does it fit? And so OpenCost definitely fit a niche within the CNCF that wasn't filled. There's no other FinOps projects within the CNCF yet. And Kubernetes is near and dear to the CNCF. Obviously, it's the first graduated project, and so we got in and immediately had to start doing a lot of cleanup. OpenCost was called the KubeCost cost model. It was already open source. Their engine of their commercial product had been open source, but it hadn't been actively part of a community, or part of a foundation and a larger open source community. It was kind of the classic, oh yeah, we've got some open source, you're welcome to kick the tires and look around, but very few people used it by itself. And so I joined a little bit after. I was at KubeCost when it was open sourced, but I wasn't the community manager yet. And so when I shortly after that, I became the community manager and started doing a lot of cleanup. Telling people, like, changing the README. So if something's wrong, you go to Slack. You don't go to KubeCost support. Sorry, it's open source now. You own both pieces. But so a lot of things like internal variable renames, or just cleanups in the README and documentation to point people back to the community, to let people know, like, this is open source. It's not a commercial offering. This is we're as a open source community, we're going to support each other, but it's divorced away from KubeCost a bit. That's not to say KubeCost isn't involved. They're easily 80% of the commits are from them, but they're getting used to being good open source citizens, right? It used to be like, this is our thing, we just commit to it, and now it's like, oh, we have maintainers who don't work here. We have other people committing to this project. So now we have fortnightly community meetings every 2 weeks. We have a calendar. We have our Slack. We have all the social media for OpenCost, and we're forming a kind of a fledgling community. We've got about 1,000 people in our Slack.
Oh, wow.
It's because we're moving into incubation, I've been running a lot of due diligence about hey, this is how healthy we are as an open source project. Because there are the kind of metrics you look for. Where are the contributions coming from? Who's actually using it in production? Who's using it as an integration? Who's using it as an end user? CNCF wants to know all that stuff before they move a project out of the sandbox. There are, I think there are like 120 sandbox projects, which is why that landscape document is so crazily large. And then maybe there are 60 incubation projects, and I think there are 25 graduated. So incubation means it's a healthy project. This is kind of a green light to other folks that like, look, we think this thing has legs. It's got a pretty healthy community. Mm-hmm. We're seeing regular releases. They're responsive to issues and PRs, and it's progressing. And tooting our own horn, OpenCost is one of the better sandbox projects. And then last year, for the 2023 wrap-up, the CNCF said we were a top 40 Linux Foundation project. And whatever metrics they're using, it's related to contributions, commits, releases, responsiveness. So that's high praise, at least to me.
Yeah, no. One of the metrics that I like paying attention to that's just fascinating to me is your number of open issues. Is it kind of a steady line, or are you on the logarithmic curve of open issues?
It's that is a tough one, because the funny thing about when KubeCost contributed it to the CNCF, they kept the Git history. And so the project already had 100 issues that had been open. They'd been using it as their commercial issue tracking. And so I kind of had to go through and say, like, this is a commercial issue. This is not an OpenCost issue. And just kind of pruning the backlog and turning on the stale bot and gently telling people, like, don't open your KubeCost issues here. There are repositories for that, and we've updated some of the templates, like where does this go? But it's KubeCost is definitely a good open source citizen. They're trying to hey, this is great. We're going to fix this issue in OpenCost because they are downstream of OpenCost. And so it's pretty good relationship. And now we've got Grafana Cloud, we've got Azure as downstream of OpenCost too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great.
And others. Yeah.
Yeah. So there is a term that you used a minute ago that I want to dig into, because it's not one that I'm particularly familiar with, and that's FinOps. Yeah. I can take a guess at what that means, but let's talk about that. What are FinOps? What does that include?
So FinOps is the Linux Foundation is a very large tent, and one of their sub projects one of their sub foundations is called the FinOps Foundation. It's the finance and operation. It's the intersection of finance and cloud operations. So understanding how to track what's going on in your cloud bill versus how you're consuming cloud. So. As you kind of mentioned in the pre-show, you're lucky enough not to have to worry about the bills. But as you start to get to scale, you're going to run into like, wait, why are we spending $500,000 a month on this? Could we be doing it better? And it's not just turn everything off. It's how do we tailor our consumption? Are there things that we could be doing to improve this? And so the FinOps Foundation has actually published a lot of guidance. The FinOps framework explains how to kind of start tackling this problem, how to think about gathering those numbers, gathering up your metrics, testing your assumptions about how can we fix this thing, how can we make savings, what are the things that we can do to optimize our spending, other than just turn everything off, which is actually sometimes step one, is like what's running that shouldn't be running because you're paying for it anyway, and then repeating that process. It's not just, unfortunately, it's not a silver bullet. You're going to iterate over the process, but they have this crawl, walk, run, methodology and different phases of operations and finance to kind of tackle that. And so there are a pair of, there's an O'Reilly book that's now in its second edition, called, it's on my desk somewhere, called like,
I know how that goes.
it's a FinOps book, right?
Somewhere.
And, they now have a conference, and they have a very active, not CNCF, but they have their own Slack, and, it's growing like wildfire because everybody's on the cloud and everybody's got this experience. And so part of what they do is, they certify different solutions as part of, hey, this is part of the how to solve these issues. And so OpenCost is a FinOps certified solution, which means, we're a tool that you use to solve these problems. And so digging into your Kubernetes usage, digging into your cloud costs, that's what OpenCost does. And so we're not going to make recommendations, but that's the first step, is having good metrics, knowing what's happening. And sometimes it might be as simple as, oh, check it out, you're paying for all this compute that's not even being used.
Sure.
And so there are a lot of tools built on top of OpenCost that are going to make recommendations. Sometimes it's just pattern matching, where when you see that 50% of your compute is unused, maybe you should resize your cluster. Maybe you're paying for a dozen medium instances when you'd be able to get away with 3 extra larges and save money. So there's a lot of optimizations you can do there. OpenCost is gathering those numbers. People have built like machine learning solutions, AI on top of that. But KubeCost that's what they're doing. They're taking all these metrics that OpenCost gathers, and they're building a whole lot of optimizations on top of that. They've got recommendations, reporting, budgets, all sorts of great stuff. Machine learning, fancy dashboards. It's all in
fancy
there.
Fancy dashboards. So you I feel like you kind of hinted at this at a couple spots, but the type of optimization you're talking about that brings costs down also would necessarily maybe be related to sustainability efforts and the kind of sustainability efforts around the CNCF. I wondered, I know there's a sustainability working group. Are you involved in that? Are you plugged in?
Yeah, we definitely are paying attention. So the CNCF has a technical advisory group, the sustainability tag, and I've gone to I lurk in their channels. I'm on their mailing list, and I'm involved. And I've gone to those, and I said, hey, I have this great CNCF project that is tracking all of our Kubernetes usage. What can you give me? So I could say, like, when I use Intel instances, they cost this much in carbon. When I use ARM, it costs this much less. Can you give me those numbers? And they can't yet. Right now, what you get for most of the carbon costs is, here's your total compute carbon footprint, which you can look at that and maybe if it was all Kubernetes, we could split it up and eventually tell you, like, here's how much carbon that namespace costs. We can't do that yet, but we're working on it. So I'm working with, there's another open source project called Cloud Carbon Footprint that is working on getting finer grained numbers. Right now, like I said, most of the numbers are at the compute level. They don't tell you, like, by the individual machines, and so we need the carbon numbers for more than just the service. We need it down to the machines, or the S3 bucket, or whatever it might be, because then we can actually correlate it back to your Kubernetes usage. But we are working on that. And fingers crossed, we'll have some announcements around that soon. But then that'll unlock all sorts of optimization opportunities. You'll be able to say, okay, I see I could turn off some stuff. That's good for carbon costs. I could potentially, I see that I have this this one workload that is super intensive. We could move that to some ARM instances. Maybe that'll save us some money. Or, maybe you see, something that is just burning through burning through money and carbon. It might be like that's where we should be optimizing our performance. And so it's an investigative tool. It gives you kind of where you should be looking and what you should be fixing. But we are going to have something in the carbon footprint in 2024. I feel confident.
In time for KubeCon coming up. Maybe.
Nice. I don't want to jinx it, but we're working on it. We're working on it. There's a lot of moving pieces.
Well,
right?
there's Paris is coming up pretty quickly, but maybe North America.
I know. The cloud providers, they talk about providing those numbers, but some of those numbers are only available through like their billing, visualizing. They're not exposing their public APIs, so they have them in internal APIs, but not public-facing ones. And so, I'm behind the scenes talking to different cloud providers, saying, "Hey, if you publish these numbers, we can ingest them and then turn around and show how much that costs." And they're receptive to it, but it's something that they're slowly doing. So I can't promise that it'll all be there, but we will. There will be one who breaks open the dam for the others. And similarly, the FinOps Foundation has a project, an effort that they're calling the FinOps the FinOps OpenCost and Usage Specification, FOCUS. And so what FOCUS is trying to do is take all these different cloud bills and standardize and normalize them into one format. So that way, reading your Azure bill, reading your GCP bill, your Oracle bill, it's each one of those is unique and different. And what FOCUS is trying to do is normalize them and make them all use the same terminology. So then you'd be able to compare your apples and oranges. You'd be able to say, my compute on Oracle versus my compute on AWS, it's, this is cheaper for the same instance types. And so, we're involved in that, standardization process too. So, hopefully, we'll be bringing FOCUS integration and carbon footprint integration into OpenCost in 2024.
So I'm thinking about this, and one of the first things to throw out here is, when you're talking about sustainability, there's more to it than just carbon, but that's kind of like the one easy thing to talk about that kind of refers to the rest of it. And we're not going to dive into all of those details here, but one of the things that comes to mind is there seems to be sort of a correlation, a one-to-one correlation between the amount of money you're spending on your cloud compute and the amount of carbon pollution and all of that is the result of it. And so it seems like this is one of those places where the two goals of not having more expenses than you need to and not polluting more than you need to really go hand in hand. And I have to say, it's really nice when that works, when being good stewards of the environment is the same thing as trying to run your business well. I wish it worked out that way everywhere.
Yeah. Well, there's another, that's definitely true and definitely love seeing that. There's another level to the carbon footprint though, is it actually, you can find out which data centers get their power from which sources. And so you might actually spend the same amount of money and, I'm just going to throw names out there like, an Oregon data center versus one in Texas. But one of them may be powered by hydro, and one of them may be powered by coal. And they might charge you the same, but they have very different carbon footprints. Or depending on the time of day, you may be having different carbon costs, associated with solar, versus nuclear, or whatever it might be. And so there's another level of optimization that happens. Yes, you can save money just by lowering that, but also you might start looking at like, oh, does this workload actually have to be in this data center? What if we moved it to this one? We're not going to save money, but we'll still lower our carbon footprint. And so that's kind of a secondary effect that we're going to get out of this.
Oh yeah, that's fascinating. I like that you present that data and you let the company make the decision. You know, how much do they care about this particular thing versus just simply saving costs. That's pretty nifty. I like that. So we've talked about this term cloud native, the Cloud Native Computer Foundation, how that's part of the Linux Foundation. What exactly, and I've had people ask me this before, when we say cloud native, what actually is the definition of that? What boxes do we have to check for an application or deployment to be actually cloud native?
That's a good question. I mean, to me, I've been doing this for a while. My answer would be, it's cloud native if you don't ever touch a box. And so you can still behave in a cloud native fashion within your own data center, right? If you can turn on a data center and start running your workloads without having to go and insert a thumb drive or log into a box and start typing, that feels more cloud native to me. To me, it's workflows and processes that are run through automation. Yes, it might be as simple as SSH in a for loop, but we've come a long way since those days, which is surprising that probably there are a lot of people out there who are still not cloud native. But they're still in the cloud. And so we're definitely trying to find those users too. We want to give them the tooling that they need to easily dig into these numbers, even if they're not on Kubernetes, even if they're not automating everything. We want to provide metrics so they can start tracking these things. But yeah, cloud native, it's a curve for sure about how far along that you are. And of course you're going to have, your Netflix and the like at the far end of it. But I think the vast majority of people are still in the middle of that curve where, we're sure we're cloud native, but they're still kind of, they've named their servers. They're still logging into them and checking on them.
Yeah, well, I think it probably depends upon how big of scale you want to talk about. Because if if you're just serving one website and you have maybe 100 hits on it a week, you don't need Kubernetes, right? It's only when
but your host does.
Well, I mean, maybe, or maybe it makes more sense to run that website off a Raspberry Pi sitting on the bookshelf. It's only when you think, okay, this is going to scale up to 1 million people hitting it. Well, at that point, we have to do something else other than the Raspberry Pi sitting on the bookshelf. And I'm curious, though, about OpenCost. Does it fit in to those less cloud-native applications? If someone is self-hosting, if they have their own hardware, if they're using Raspberry Pis, is there a place where OpenCost still makes sense, even for those smaller deployments?
Absolutely. So OpenCost does support on-premises, so you can provide your own pricing and billing. So even without a cloud provider, I could be tracking my internal costs. And so if I'm say I'm a managed service provider, I could have my own custom billing, and I could say look, we've got a bunch of racks of Raspberry Pis, and your usage of them is you're consuming 60% of them, and you'll just kind of make up some billing numbers, but you can use it to track usage across those clusters. I personally, I've got 2 internal clusters. I've got an x86 and it's not all Raspberry Pi. There's some other devices in there, but I have an ARM cluster running K3s that I run OpenCost on, and I'm just tracking internal workloads just to exercise that part of the code, but also it's OpenCost is not particularly heavyweight. It's not consuming a lot of resources anyway. I mean, it's writing out every minute, so it's not digging too much, and so there's definitely a usage for small deployments if you need to track splitting this up. A lot of it's hard to track how much a namespace or a workload cost in a cloud native environment, because a lot of these are ephemeral. They're coming and going. You have a job that might last 30 minutes. You might have others that last 30 days. And so what OpenCost is going to do is track just all those numbers. As things come and go, we'll be able to tell you like, this namespace, sure, the containers are only living for 10 minutes on average, but over the month, you had 10,000 deployments, and it cost this much. So there's definitely on-prem usage. There's definitely small deployment usage. We also have some really large deployments. People running literally thousands of node clusters with OpenCost. Usually they're pushing to something a little beefier than Prometheus.
So I'm wondering, so we talked all about all of this great data that you can gather. What do people do with that data? And in particular, is there anything on your roadmap to make it easier to use that data? Yeah,
well, so out of the box, OpenCost depends on kind of the default Prometheus. And the default Prometheus is tuned for 14 days of storage. It's open source. You could change that to whatever you want. And then OpenCost has a relatively simple React UI. It's one page, 2 page that has calls to the API that renders, hey, here's your 14 days of data. Occasionally we get folks who are like, hey, this thing doesn't scale, and they've got 100 nodes, and they're running some queries over a week, and it's literally going and saying like, give me every 5 minutes of data across 100 nodes. Prometheus doesn't like that much. Usually, what people are going to do is forward that to something bigger. Thanos, Mimir, Cortex. There are a lot of Prometheus compatible databases that are meant for like longer term storage. What people do with that data? You can federate those, bring them all into one visualization. Start to compare all your different clusters. That's kind of what they do with that. What right now OpenCost is just Prometheus. We've got a couple of issues open to like document how to do that forwarding. The support's there. People are definitely doing it. We just don't have it well documented. KubeCost does that. They forward to Thanos. Grafana forwards to Mimir. It's a GPL licensed version of Thanos. And so that's one form of long-term storage. We're constantly getting Prometheus like query updates and fixes. Azure's contributed a lot, Grafana Labs contribute a lot. A lot of people are just saying like, this query could be optimized, and so the performance gets better all the time, just because people run this thing in production. We also have CSV export. So if you want just daily dumps of your data, we can export them as CSV. One of our community members recently contributed a new repository around Parquet export. Parquet is an open source standard for large data exports. I don't remember which Apache project it came out of, but so we recently added an exporter so you can get daily dumps of your data, to be ingested into some other BI tool, Crystal Reports or what have you. They'll take Parquet. So we're working on getting the data out of the system so you can put it into other more durable long-term storage. Mm-hmm.
I have to ask this question. This is both. This is one of my favorite questions and one of Jonathan's favorite questions. But I'll go there. I'll go ahead and go there. I'm gonna steal it. I mean, it's a great question. I always ask this. But are users surprising you? Like, in other words, has anybody used it in a way that was unexpected? It is designed for a certain thing, but has anybody ever adapted it that you know of to do something a little different that was surprising to you?
Yeah, I mean, one of the great things is, at KubeCon, we've had a kiosk where they have a project pavilion where all the sandbox projects get to hang out, and people will come up and they're
I wondered
like,
that exact thing. Yeah. And if they could automate the
So
solution.
definitely we get
Yeah.
things like hooking it up to autoscalers, where within Kubernetes you can say, "Hey, when this happens, do that." You know, when you see
Please.
these, when you see these metrics, yeah. So people have built autoscalers on top of OpenCost that say, you know, when my billing does this, start doing that. You know, turn things off. Yeah, please, right? Don't allow. I mean, it's guardrails. Or, you know, when the costs drop, you know, maybe make it bigger. Maybe, you know, if you see the pricing start to drop because it's after hours, start ramping up our usage. You know, or spot instances are available. You know, start using those instead. So definitely we're part of a lot of you know, auto scaling and machine learning and, you know, AI, where essentially you're looking at the patterns of usage and costs and then making, you know, decisions based on that. And so people build their own solutions on top of OpenCost. That's always exciting. And so we have a lot of OpenCost gets embedded in a lot of those because it's, you know, we're just providing really useful metrics to gather that. And, you know, that's what KubeCost does on top of OpenCost. That's what, you know, Grafana Labs is doing on top of OpenCost. You know, people who embed it, that it's the engine for making those sorts of cool integrations.
So I'm curious, does OpenCost, are you eating your own dog food? Like how much of this do you use internally to keep track of things?
You know, the nice thing about being a CNCF project is you don't have to eat the dog food, or you don't have to pay for the dog food.
There you go.
We are not, but interestingly, the Linux Foundation is using OpenCost by way of KubeCost. So the Linux Foundation is actually using KubeCost to watch their own internal usage of compute. So a lot of the different cloud providers, AWS, Azure, GCP, Oracle, Scaleway, Equinix, they're contributing compute hours to the Linux Foundation, who then turns around and gives them to the Kubernetes project, gives them to all these build farms, all of all the different projects that need to run CI/CD and testing. They have an internal team, the SIG Infra for the Linux Foundation that gathers up, you know, serves all these projects and all the incubation projects, all the graduated projects. They're all getting compute, you know, and they all get, you know, you just kind of get some access to this. They're actually using KubeCost to track their own usage internally because literally they have thousands of Kubernetes clusters, which is hard to do with OpenCost. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to, you know, OpenCost is primarily single cluster based, and then, you know, you could federate on top of that, but you're starting to build a lot of your own tooling. KubeCost is doing that for the Linux Foundation.
Okay. I just had a humorous thought that came to mind, and I don't know that you have any visibility into this, but so it goes like this. You know, there has to be some businesses out there that they're taking the OpenCost tools and, you know, they break things down into their different business units, and they take those costs and bring them into their accounting. And so then they have a spreadsheet where, you know, okay, this is how much this particular business unit is making us. This is how much this particular business unit costs. And one of those costs is your cloud stuff.
Yep.
And the humorous thought that came to mind is how many things have been killed using the data from OpenCost? Do you have any stories about businesses? And I don't know that you would. Like I said, this is kind of internal data, but do you know of anything that OpenCost has led to the demise of?
In a good way, yes. So what you've just described in FinOps and you know, finance talk is chargeback. Chargeback is when you have an internal bucket of money and you split it among your organizations, and you're like, look, our cloud bill is, you know, $1 million a month, and, you know, 300,000 goes to this team, 300,000 goes to that team, and 400,000 goes to that team. And, you know, you start tracking those numbers. The company pays that $1 million, but each team doesn't have their own bill, right? So you have chargeback where you have internal billing. The precursor to that is showback. right? You're just showing people, oh, here's how much you're spending. Maybe you should do something about that, right? And then, of course, the first version of Showback is what we affectionately call Shameback, where you're like, look what you're doing, stop what you're doing. And so Shameback is kind of the first step when you turn this on and you start seeing where all the money's going. Anecdotally, we catch a fair number of botnets. People have things that have been exploited in their bill. They're getting this bill and they're like, this month it's 500,000, next month it's 550,000. They're not seeing the individual things that are like popping it up. But when you start digging into the numbers, you're like, whoa, it turns out like this namespace had been exploited, or maybe not at the Kubernetes level, but something inside the application had gone wrong. Someone had gotten credentials, and all of a sudden, there's a Bitcoin miner running nonstop, and so unfortunately, we find a fair amount of that. And so, OpenCost, when you start tying into dashboards and reporting, becomes like just an early warning system. One of the interesting things about the way we're gathering data is, we're using on-demand pricing because there's a time delay of when your bill gets published. AWS and Azure, all the cloud providers, they're not saying like, oh, we know what all your discounts are. We can tell you within 5 minutes how much everything costs. It's actually 24 or 48 hours later, they're like, oh, you had some discounts, you hit those thresholds, here's your real bill. But people want to see like, they want to see the cost immediately. And so we might not always have the exact cost. We might not match your final bill because we don't have those discounts built into OpenCost, but we show you changes in velocity. We show you, oh, you're spending a lot more money now. Put that on a dashboard, and use that as early warning. And so we get used in that function as well.
That humors me a lot. That OpenCost is almost accidentally an incident detection tool. I've been there. I've been there. I've gotten the email from my provider. It's like, hey, by the way, this particular server is an open redirect for DNS now, or this particular server is sending out a whole lot of spam. We'd love for you to look into that. And it would be great to have an automated tool like this that finds that stuff earlier, that you don't have to get the email of shame from your ISP.
Yeah.
Oh, good stuff.
Yeah.
All
so
right.
that's why we're a monitoring tool. I mean, in that CNCF landscape, we are in the observability realm. That's where we are.
Makes sense. It's more than just the dollars and cents. I like it. All right. So I'm going to ask you a hard question because you got to do set math. You have to think about all the things that you wanted to talk about and all the things we asked you about. And that is there anything that we didn't cover that you really wanted to cover today?
I mean, I think we've hit all the major topics. We've talked about the roadmap. We've got carbon footprint is coming. We have some more cloud providers are going to be supported soon. We hope to be making some announcements around those. We are always looking for more contributors. Definitely join our Slack and get involved. We, just like every other open source project, documentation is the hard part. Cloud billing has a lot of knobs, and so a lot of configuration options. There's a lot of Prometheus versions out there as well. So we're this hard matrix of configuration. So that's what actually open source is really good at, is covering off all the edge cases. And so definitely appreciate everyone who's involved and look forward to seeing more folks. I think we've touched on most everything. The project, like I said, the project is going really well. We've got the carbon footprints coming, more cloud providers are coming. It's all good.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, I've got to ask you two final questions before we let you go. And that is, what is your favorite text editor and scripting language?
My favorite text editor is Emacs. I have been an Emacs user a long time. And What's funny is I actually I started on VI and proper VI, back on
Real VI way back in the day, yeah.
yeah, and I worked at a company that literally was NetBSD on the desktop because the architect of the company was a NetBSD core maintainer and made us all go down that path. And he used Emacs, and so Emacs was the standard. So I started with Evil, which is the VI bindings for Emacs, and eventually, we ran everything through Emacs, and I can't escape its gravitational pull. I've actually presented at Emacs Conf, and I used to maintain the IntelliJ bindings for Emacs, and I've tried to switch to VS Code with Emacs bindings. So I'm an Emacs user through and through.
Yeah, and then scripting language.
I used to work in a Ruby shop, so I love me some Ruby, but I still use a lot of Bash too. So I'm gonna stick with Bash.
All right, that is a fair answer. Well, it has been great to have you, and we're at the bottom of the hour. We've covered a lot, and hopefully after you guys make some announcements, maybe we can have you back and talk about those. So thank you, sir, for being here.
Thank you.
All right, Katherine. It sounds like you have a new tool to add to your cloud native toolbox.
I guess, yeah. I'm intrigued. I've learned something. I'm gonna go research FinOps on the side later. Dig
I
in.
think of all the things, the one that fascinated me the most. Of course, I'm sort of a security guy, so it's no surprise. But this idea that, by the way, when you track all of this stuff, it also lets you know when something has been compromised and someone is mining Bitcoin on your
I
stuff.
like that too.
Yeah, I kind of wish we had touched on that sooner because we could have talked about it for a bit more. I think. That's pretty
true.
neat.
Compromises are expensive in more ways than one.
Yes, they really can be.
So many ways.
All right. Well, good stuff. Hey, do you have anything that you want to plug?
Sure. Yeah. So I still do the other podcasts. I've got Open at Intel, which is fun. And then Doc and I still have Reality 2.0. I also should mention, since we're talking about cloud native stuff, I will be at KubeCon in Paris, podcasting live from the expo in my little cute fish bowl. So if anybody's going to be there, I hope you'll come by and wave.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Very cool. All right. Well, next week we have Kumar. Oh, I'm going to slaughter his last name. Singrikanda, and he's going to talk about open source DevOps at Toyota. And he's got a book he's written about open source DevOps. I'm hoping that we can talk about the DevOps stuff, and I'm hoping we can also talk about open source at Toyota. I think that would be extremely fascinating.
Does sound cool.
It does. It does sound really cool. And so that is what we are looking forward to next week. And then as far as plugs that I've got, well, of course, there's the Untitled Linux Show over at Twit. And for now, that is a Club Twit native, or a Club Twit exclusive. I suppose native works. It's native to Club Twit.
Yeah, sure.
And then the other thing is on Friday mornings, you can go take a look at Hackaday. The security column goes live there every Friday morning, and would love for you to check that out. Thank you so much to those of you that caught us live in the Discord, and thank you to everyone on the download too. We sure appreciate it. And we will see you next time on Floss Weekly.